Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Doug Chilcott, Creative Director at TED Partnerships. Welcome to our Revolution panel here at TED 2014. We're very happy to have some of the filmmakers of the Academy Award-nominated documentary The Square with us. We have Jahan Nujaim and Karim Amer joining us here at TED. And joining us via Skype are some other people that are actually in the midst of this revolution in ideas and spread of social media. We have Bahia Shehab, an art historian calling in from Cairo. Hello, Bahia. We have Ed U, a photojournalist who's actually joining us from the Crimea, a place that little news is happening there. I hope we can actually keep you on the whole time, Ed. I know you're in an interesting situation. We have Anwar Dafa Allah, founder of TEDx Khartoum, and Skyping in from the Sudan. Good morning, Anwar. And lastly, we have Brian Reese, who's the real-time news editor from Mashable, who actually kind of assembles news through the outflow of social media and citizen reporting and such. So I'm going to start with Jahan and Amer. Obviously, the coverage of the Tahrir Square and the revolution in Egypt seems like it was beyond the tipping point of social media and people kind of finding a voice and sharing ideas and sharing stories, which is such a powerful part of your film. Could you talk a little bit about how that came together?
Well, I think here in the States and around the world, what you see is the biggest headline. You know, you see the bloodiest battle, you see the election, but you don't understand the human struggle that goes on. And that's been this way in history. I mean, Karim calls it, we know it as the greatest hits of change, you know? I mean, you see basically Nelson Mandela,
ending apartheid,
or
you see Gandhi liberating India, you see Martin Luther King saying, I have a dream, but you don't see how hard it was to get there. You don't see, so what we feel is like we live in a world where we live in the mythology of change, but we don't actually see the real stories of change. And so for us, like many people, there was this kind of fairy tale where in 18 days, Egyptians could come down, take down a dictator, and democracy would flourish overnight. Most people left after that, and we found that a dedicated few amount of people who became representative of many of the characters in our film came back to that square and said, this is just the beginning, and we're going to keep going back to that square and keep trying to hold power accountable until we get the demands of the story we know that's possible for the future.
I think that's actually why we've had some of the support that we have has been from revolutionaries. Like we have Jody Evans in the audience and Lekha Singh, and they saw the film and they saw this as an example of what it actually takes to make change, that it's an ongoing struggle, that rights are never given to you, they're always taken. And so our hope with making this film was to really follow the roller coaster ride of change, which is still continuing today.
Totally. Actually, I'd like to bring in Bahia at this point. We talk a lot about social media, and everybody always imagines Twitter and tweets and everything else. If you could talk a little bit about your stenciling campaign in Cairo, both during the revolution and after the revolution when things weren't happening. It's almost like a social media using old forms.
Exactly. Yeah, this was actually the case. We were trying to create something on the street, but unfortunately, whatever we created on the street was directly erased. So the strongest weapon we had was the internet, to upload these images and share them and share the stories. So this was the game changer for us. Even if you were covered on the street, even if somebody erased your message, you were still able to share it with the rest of the world.
Anwar, I'd like to jump to you. Anwar, you set up TEDx Khartoum. Spreading ideas in the Sudan has been somewhat of a challenge. Could you talk a little bit about your work there?
The TEDx Khartoum is a kind of movement that attracted youth in Sudan. They have over 35 million in the population, over 60% of whom are youth between 19 and 25, and they were finding their way to express their passion, their ideas. They want to break the sense of isolation that our country have because of the government and its policies worldwide and so on. We picked up like the wrong theme for the conference in 2013. It was knowledge into action, and that made the security people freaked, and they shut down the event during the speakers on stage. I think that social media has a big impact in Sudan, and as we get more and more connected to ideas, and we have exposure through TED, TEDx, whatever the platform. I think things will change. Definitely will change. We're now, observing what's going on Egypt, in neighbor countries, in Kenya. Kenya has a global, the very rapid um, tech hubs growing, and we are trying to learn and connect and see what we can do in the future.
Ed, let's jump to you. Obviously, it's one of the biggest stories happening on the planet right now. Could you tell us a little bit about what's happening there and what you're seeing on the streets?
I'm in Crimea right now, in Ukraine. I could be in Russia right now. I can't really
You don't know where you are.
tell where I am. Russia Crimea just voted to secede from Ukraine, and the story is as Russia moves to annex Crimea from Ukraine, what's going to happen? Who's for it, who's against it, and what the implications are for the East, for the West. Right now, I just came from a military base where they pulled down the Ukrainian flag and flew up the Russian flag. What's going to happen here? Is there going to be a conflict? Is there going to be a surrender? No one really knows, and so that's what I've been in the midst of covering right now. It's been a really fluid situation. It's been actually stressful. So,
Brian, I want to throw your question to you. I was thinking about this morning, and the idea of, we always think about the Big Brother. We did a session with the NSA here at TED. I kind of feel like what your work is doing, it's almost reverse Big Brother. I feel like now people actually have the power to actually tell stories and kind of document and share and get them out there. And that's kind of driving what your work is, just kind of gathering stories as they're happening from on the ground. People, could you talk a little bit about that process and how that's changing?
When it comes to kind of political unrest and revolutions, for people like myself who are in New York City or here in the States or in Europe, or when we're not at the scene of the grounds, we don't know what's going on unless people are sharing and telling their stories from what they're seeing and their point of view. So whenever something starts, whether it's the SOS Venezuela movement in Venezuela, the protests in Turkey, the Euromaidan in Ukraine, we always kind of zero in on the people who are tweeting the most around a certain hashtag. So we can identify the leaders, we can identify those who are speaking on behalf of the people. And then we also kind of filter that in with people who are just taking photos. I mean, there was a great selfie that some protesters took in Turkey the other day. And it's kind of the content like that people like myself can gather and tell a really, really compelling story to people who don't live in the countries where these are happening, so they understand what's going on the ground.
That's great. John, I want to come back to you and Amer. Impact of the film in terms of the people in the film, and I'm just kind of curious what the reaction has been.
Yeah, the reaction's been amazing. I mean, we tried to make a very, very personal film because the deeper you get personally, the more global your story is. And that is why the story, I think, has been picked up in places all around the world. It's been released in Netflix in over 50 countries. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten the official permission to show it in Egypt yet. But at the same time, it was nominated. It was one of the first Egyptian film that was nominated. And so young people took it upon themselves, as they're doing every day, in many other ways, to get it offline and share it. And then we released a full quality version online, and so it's been shared over 2 million times now, or something like that.
It's being seen on underground screenings in Egypt, not official public screenings.
And in Kiev, we've had the protesters have taken the film themselves, translated it.
We've also they took and translated it. They put Ukrainian subtitles. And then a few days later, they added a Ukrainian dubbed version, and they had a screening in the Maidan. They Skyped in our main characters from Cairo and had this incredible kind of conversation. And then, they were saying at the end, they were chanting, they were saying, Maidan will not be free until Al-Midan, which is in Egypt, is free. And that solidarity, I think, is very representative of a new kind of pattern we're seeing. I mean, I know we've run down circles in Cairo, tear gas before, and you see now the image of power has shifted. We see this sea of people coming down, and saying, "I am here. Hear my voice." And you see this now in Tahrir Square happen. It's happening in Maidan in Kiev. It's happening in Caracas. It's happening in Bangkok. So we start to see that this is not just a regional issue anymore. This is a global issue. And I think what's happening and what social media is doing is that for too long we've lived in a world where the story has been written by a strong man. So it's the strong man who wins writes the story. Today we have the ability to say all of us have a voice and all of us can contribute in the writing of our story. And social media is that tool that's leveling the playing field. And I think that every person who steps into that square, as Ahmed, our main character, says, everyone who goes down and claims their rights and feels that sense of authorship will never go back, because once you start writing your own story, it's a new form of oxygen for you. You can't go back, and I think that it's so incredible to be able to share these stories at TED, through sites like Mashable, and as you were saying, if our stories can't be written, if our stories are shut down, we're going to write them on the walls. If they whitewash them, they'll be uploaded, and we'll continue to get them out there. So I think that governments that fail to realize what's happening will face a lot of trouble.
Ed, I want to go back to you for follow-up. In terms of, obviously you're there to document what's happening, and this idea of social media and people taking selfies and obviously documenting it in their own ways. How do you contrast what you're doing with what the people on the streets are doing, and do they all kind of tell a story together?
So I work for the mainstream media, and I guess I'm the antithesis of social, not antithesis, but like, I think what it used to be was that for the media, there was kind of a disconnect between the people and media outlets. And now what's really amazing with social media, with Twitter, with Facebook, is that as a journalist, I can connect with normal people on the ground, and they can also connect with me. So it's interesting because as a journalist, I also have to be more responsible, because the moment I publish something, people can call me out if I'm wrong, people can have an opinion immediately, and it's that one-to-one conversation. That said, when I'm on the ground covering something, I can find out exactly what's happening with millions of people in one scene. And that's a pretty amazing thing that didn't used to exist 5-6 years ago.
Bahia, I want to come back to you. In terms of, you'd mentioned that the stencils were actually erased quite quickly, and then you were actually able to find an outlet for them online. Was there any problem of them being expunged online? Did you actually have any challenges with the technology in terms of people purging things, or?
Not really, but I want to comment on Jihan's film. We are so happy that she was able to document that period for us, and we were extremely disappointed when it was not released for the masses to see in the city, because this is where it's most relevant. This is where we want to keep the memory alive. So what happened is that people started creating screenings in their houses, and she can tell you more about it. But what was beautiful is that no one wanted to watch it alone. And the sense of wanting to relive the experience was what is so beautiful about it, to really share it with people who were actually there with you. I really hope that you will get over the bureaucracy of screening it in our cinemas, and I would really love to see it with a lot of people around me in a cinema one day in Cairo.
Thank you. We're still working on it, so we're still pushing through. But meanwhile, so many young people have seen it and written us, and social media is amazing because people are connecting on Twitter, on #TheSquare, and people from all of these squares around the world have translated, Ahmed saying we're looking for a conscience, into dozens of different languages. So that's been actually amazing to see.
And what's, with what she's saying is like, what's happened with social media is that the gatekeepers are no longer in charge the way they used to be. So if people try to stop ideas from flowing in the kind of in the pre-digital mentality, it just creates a surge of people to rush that idea further. And I think that this new method of communication that we're seeing from square to square is showing this power that people feel today, where one photo, one tweet, one stencil can change the conversation. People feel this power in their ability to write the story, and I think that that's a transformative force that we're just learning the power of today.
Brian, I'd like to bring you in. Actually, we have like an establishment journalist, someone from the New York Times, with Ed. This idea of citizen journalism and the idea of, again, having authority or proving that something has to be fact to be in the New York Times versus a handcrafted, I just saw this on the street and I wrote it on my Facebook post and it goes around the world. There's a kind of truth to that actually can never be found in a mainstream, fully vetted, whatever, all the processes that we actually put on it. Could you talk a little bit about contrasting those different types of journalism that we're seeing today?
Sure. I think what's really interesting for us is, we see this really play out in real time. So whether you have people on the ground that are coordinating that they're going to go to a certain square, we're watching. We're almost right there in that crowd with you. We're taking the photos, we're collecting them, we're writing the article as it goes. And so it's this really kind of real-time journalism that lets people follow along as it's happening. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you'd maybe get the story once a day, the nightly news, the morning paper. So people really have a sense of, as really these fast-changing news events kind of shift and the power kind of surges, you get a sense of really that you're really there on the ground in real time. And so that's really fascinating for us here at home. And then what's also interesting is we're not just relying on reporters and journalists who are there on the ground. You know, you kind of build up this network of activists, you build up this network of organizers, and you build up a network of photographers who you can rely on to kind of share factual information. And then that's what you really collect to tell your story.
You referenced actually there's squares all over the world that are learning from each other. Are people crowdsourcing and kind of sharing best practices? Is there like a roadmap for revolution that's out there that people can kind of tap into?
I mean, when we did the screening in Ukraine, we obviously needed a translator. So,
Right.
you know, this is something for I'm sure the TED community is working on it already, but immediate translation is needed between people. But,
Right.
but you do see a lot of communication online and through Twitter. You know, obviously this is not concerning the masses, but it is very interesting to see this cross-border communication. It shows that we're in this increasingly borderless world.
Right, and you see also that the ceiling of expectation and hope is interconnected, right? So if one square succeeds, it allows for other people in other squares in other countries to dare to dream as well and to imagine what they can do in writing their story. So we have a responsibility to stand in solidarity with any group of people who are daring to dream and write their own story, whether they're standing in Tahrir Square or in Kiev or in Istanbul or in Caracas or anywhere in the world. And on the other side of that, we have a responsibility to keep holding power accountable. So, because if the United States allows for what the NSA is doing to continue, then what that sends a message is to other governments to say, well, if America can spy on its own people, then so can we. So, at the end of the day, all of this comes down to holding power accountable. And democracy, as we've learned, is an ongoing quest to do that. So, what our film is trying to say is, find your square, find that piece of that idea or that piece of turf that you're willing to stand on and say, this is me and I'm going to stand for this because I know that this is an important piece of land to keep passing down from generations to come.
And I think a very important thing, which is what everybody on this panel works on, is communication and free expression. And courage does encourage other courage or inspires other courage. I mean, I will say that if you had told me 3 years ago that I would be running away from police and army, I would have said that you were crazy. But being surrounded by the kinds of people that we were filming, that's what made me put myself in that position, because people were putting everything up on the line, and releasing a film like this, doing the kind of work that everybody on this panel is doing, inspires others to do so, which is so important right now when the biggest issue is self-censorship. I mean, think about the US post-September 11th. One of the biggest issues was the fact that journalists themselves were self-censoring themselves. And that's where you get in Egypt right now. We're going through this period of fear, right? And we're self-censoring ourselves. We're not talking about what needs to be talked about. So our hope for this film and releasing it widely was to be able to hold a mirror to ourselves over the last 3 years, what we actually went through in order to be able to move forward, remembering our mistakes and not making them again in the future. And it's very difficult to do. I mean, we're holding a mirror at this time of change when people have not yet formed the narrative. I mean, we were talking to somebody who was working on 12 Years a Slave. And that is holding a mirror to what happened in the United States. But it's 125 years, 50 years later, Right. So it's easy. We know what we think about slavery now. But we're doing this kind of work, releasing films like this at this time when people are still figuring out what we think the story is more difficult.
Or holding, and it's the same thing with the situation that we just saw with Snowden and the NSA. I mean, Snowden is holding a mirror to American society today, and it holds people in power accountable, and it's a very hard thing to do that.
I mean, that's why Laura Poitras is
what we have the opportunity to do today
right
is that we can stand in solidarity with our power of witness and not make it a lonely fight. So we can stand with Snowden and say, you're not alone. We believe in what you're doing, and we're going to stand with you. We can stand with the people who are fighting in the Ukraine for freedom and say, we are standing with you. We can stand with the people in Egypt or whatever country where people are trying to make change happen. And that's the power power of the internet and the power of social media in bringing the narrative into a much more inclusive place.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Nice to see you guys.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for watching. Actually, there'll be panels throughout the week, so if you've actually enjoyed this one and discovered some new ideas, check that out later on the same place where you found this current video. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.